She's sitting in a parking lot outside an Olive Garden. 74 years old, hands trembling so badly she can't unclasp her seatbelt. She hasn't sat across from a man at dinner since 1986. And the only reason she's here tonight is because a 23-year-old who shares her last name swiped right on a stranger for her. This is how it happened. Her name was Dolores, but everyone called her Dee. Dee lived alone in a small brick ranch house in Dayton, Ohio, the same house she'd moved into in 1971, back when the neighborhood was all young families and tricycles on sidewalks. Now, most of the driveways were empty. The tricycles were long gone. She kept a tidy house. Not in the magazine perfect way, in the lived-in way. A crocheted blanket folded over every chair. A ceramic rooster on the kitchen windowsill she'd had since Carter was president. The faint smell of coffee that never quite left the air because the pot was always on. Always. Even at 9 at night. Even when nobody was coming over. Especially when nobody was coming over. If stories about finding love again when the world says it's too late, if those are the ones that stay with you the way they stay with me, that subscribe button means I can keep finding them for you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Dee had been married once. To a man named Frank. They'd married young. She was 19, he was 21. And for 16 years, they built a life that looked like every other life on their street. 2 kids. A station wagon. Vacation Bible school in the summers. Frank worked at the GM plant. Dee worked part-time at the public library and full-time at everything else. And then, Frank left. Not dramatically. Not with a fight that shattered dishes or a confession that split the world open. He just came home one Tuesday in 1986 and said he didn't want to be married anymore. Said it the way someone says they're thinking about trading in the car. Calm. Decided. Already past it. Dee was 36 years old. She didn't fall apart. That wasn't her way. She got up the next morning and made the kids breakfast and drove to the library and stamped books and smiled at patrons and came home and heated up leftover meatloaf and helped with homework and waited until both kids were asleep before she sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried so quietly the house didn't even know. She did that for about 3 months, and then she stopped crying. And she just kept going. Years passed. Her daughter Karen grew up and married a good man. Her son David moved to Colorado and called every Sunday. Dee retired from the library after 29 years. They gave her a cake with buttercream frosting and a card signed by 43 people, and she drove home alone and set the card on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a long time. People asked her, over the years, friends, her sister, Margie, even Karen, gently, once or twice, "Don't you ever think about dating again, Mom?" And Dee would smile, this particular smile she had, warm but closed, like a door you could see through but couldn't open, and she'd say, "Oh, I'm fine. I've got my shows. I've got my garden. I don't need all that." And she meant it. Mostly. She mostly meant it. But here's the thing about loneliness, it doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like a woman who sets 2 placemats at the table out of habit, and then quietly puts one back. Sometimes it looks like a full day, where the only voice you hear is the television. Sometimes it looks like standing in the grocery store holding a bunch of bananas and realizing there's no rush to get home because no one is waiting. Dee had been alone for 38 years. She wasn't unhappy, but there was a hollow place inside her daily life, a silence shaped exactly like another person, and she had gotten so used to walking around it that she'd forgotten it was there. Her granddaughter, Maya, had not forgotten. Maya was 23. Karen's daughter. She was loud where Dee was quiet, bold where Dee was cautious, and she had the kind of stubborn love that doesn't accept "I'm fine" as a final answer. She'd been close to her grandmother her whole life. Weekend sleepovers as a kid, long phone calls in college, and now, since she'd moved back to Dayton after graduating, Tuesday night dinners at Dee's kitchen table. It was during one of those dinners, a cold night in February, soup on the stove, wind rattling the storm windows, that Maya noticed something. Dee was telling a story about a couple she'd seen at the pharmacy. An older man holding the door for his wife, and the wife had reached back and squeezed his hand as she walked through. That was it. That was the whole story. But the way Dee told it, The softness in her voice, the way she paused mid-sentence and looked down at her soup. Maya saw it. The wanting. The quiet, buried, almost invisible wanting that Dee would never, ever name out loud. And something clicked in Maya's chest like a latch releasing. She didn't say anything that night. She helped wash the dishes. She kissed her grandmother on the cheek. She drove home. And then she did something that would either be the best idea she'd ever had, or a disaster she could never undo. Maya made her grandmother a Tinder profile. Now, before you react, she didn't do it carelessly. She thought about it for a week. She talked to her mom about it. Karen said, "She'll kill you." Maya said, "Maybe, but what if she doesn't?" Karen paused for a long time, and then she said, "Use the photo from Thanksgiving. The one where she's laughing at Dad's joke. She looks like herself in that one." So Maya built the profile. Carefully, tenderly, like she was writing a letter on behalf of someone she loved more than she knew how to say. The bio read, "I'm 74. I like strong coffee, mystery novels, and walking in my garden before the sun gets too high. I haven't done this in a very long time. Please be kind." She set the age range. She set the distance. She used 3 photos. The Thanksgiving one of Dee in her garden wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and one from Maya's college graduation, where Dee was beaming so hard her eyes were nearly closed. And then, Maya drove to her grandmother's house on the Tuesday night, sat down at the kitchen table, and told her what she'd done. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Maya counted. Dee stared at the phone screen. Then she looked up at Maya. Then back at the screen. Then she said, in a voice so flat it could sand wood, "What is Tinder?" Maya explained. Gently, slowly, watching her grandmother's face shift from confusion to disbelief, to something Maya couldn't quite read, something between terror and curiosity. "You swiped on people? For me?" "Just a few. Grandma, you have 11 matches." "11 what?" "11 men who saw your profile and said, 'Yes, I'd like to talk to her.'" Dee put the phone down on the table like it was hot. She pressed her hands flat on either side of it. She stared at it. And then, so quietly that Maya almost missed it, she said, 11? There was something in that word. Something small and startled and alive. Like a bird that had forgotten it could sing, hearing its own voice for the first time in decades. Maya pushed the phone back toward her gently. "You don't have to do anything. But, will you just look?" Dee looked. She scrolled through the profiles the way someone browses a menu in a language they used to speak. Slowly. Carefully. Her finger hovering over the screen like she was afraid touching it would make it all disappear. Most of the men she dismissed immediately. Too young. Too flashy. One was holding a fish. "Why is he holding a fish?" she asked, genuinely bewildered, and Maya laughed so hard she nearly fell out of her chair. But then Dee stopped scrolling. His name was Arthur. He was 77. A retired high school history teacher from Springfield, about 45 minutes east. His profile photo showed a man with white hair and kind eyes in a sweater vest, an actual sweater vest, standing in front of a bookshelf. His bio said, "Wide hour. 2 grown kids. I still believe in slow dancing in the kitchen. Looking for someone to talk to who remembers what vinyl sounds like." Dee read it twice. Then she said, very quietly, "He sounds like a real person." Maya's heart was beating so fast she could hear it. "Do you want me to message him?" Dee looked at her granddaughter, looked back at the phone, looked at the ceramic rooster on the windowsill, like it might have an opinion. Tell him I have a whole shelf of vinyl, and that my favorite is Ella Fitzgerald. Now, if you think you know where this is going, I want you to hold that thought, because what happened between Dee and Arthur over the next few weeks is not the story you're expecting. And honestly, what would you have done? At 74, after almost 4 decades alone? If someone opened a door you'd sealed shut so long ago, you'd forgotten there was a room behind it. Tell me in the comments, I want to hear it, because what Dee did next, it surprised even Maya. Arthur wrote back within an hour. He said Ella Fitzgerald was his late wife's favorite too. He said he hadn't heard someone to watch over me in years because it used to make him cry. He said he didn't cry about it anymore. He just missed having someone to sit with while it played. Dee read that message 4 times. Then she closed the phone and didn't open it again for 2 days. Maya panicked. She called her grandmother 3 times, no answer. She drove over on Thursday and found Dee in the garden, pulling weeds that didn't need pulling, and she knew. She knew her grandmother was scared. "Grandma, talk to me." Dee didn't look up. She kept pulling at a weed that was already out of the ground. Her hands were covered in soil. "I don't know how to do this anymore, Maya. I don't know if I ever knew. Frank asked me to marry him at a church picnic when I was 19. I never learned how to start. I only ever learned how to stay. And then I learned how to be alone. And I got good at it." She paused. "I got really good at it. That's not a reason not to try." "It might be. What if I meet him and I have nothing to say? What if I've been quiet so long I've forgotten how to be interesting?" Maya knelt down in the dirt beside her grandmother and took her soil-covered hands and held them. "Grandma, you are the most interesting person I know. You read 2 books a week. You can name every bird in this yard by its call. You made me believe in love even though I never once saw you in it. That's how powerful you are. You made a little girl believe in something she never even witnessed. Do you know how rare that is?" Dee's chin trembled. She looked away. But that night, she opened the app. She wrote back to Arthur. And something began. They messaged every day. Then they started calling. Their first phone call lasted 14 minutes. Their second lasted an hour and 40. By the third call, Dee was sitting in the kitchen with the lights off, laughing at a story Arthur was telling about a student who'd once tried to convince him that Abraham Lincoln invented basketball. Maya came over one Tuesday and heard her grandmother on the phone in the other room, and she stopped in the doorway and just listened, not to the words, to the sound. This warm, open, unguarded sound that she had never heard come out of her grandmother before, like a window that had been painted shut for decades, had finally been pried open, and the air was rushing in. But then, the question came. The inevitable question. Arthur asked Dee to dinner, and everything seized up. Dee said she'd think about it. Then she didn't call him for 3 days. Arthur, to his enormous credit, didn't push. He sent one message: "No rush, I'm not going anywhere. I've got nothing but time and a pretty good collection of sweater vests." But inside Dee's house, a war was being fought. She tried on clothes she hadn't worn in years. Nothing felt right. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and saw every line, every year, every piece of evidence that time had kept moving even when she had stopped. She opened her closet and stared at the shelf in the back where she kept Frank's old jacket. She'd never gotten rid of it. And something about seeing it there made her feel like she was betraying a version of herself she'd built brick by brick over 38 years. The alone version, the I'm fine version, the version that didn't need anyone because needing someone was what got her destroyed the first time. She called Maya. It was 11 o'clock at night. "I can't do it. Grandma, I'm too old. It's too late. I had my chance at this and it didn't work, and I survived it, and I am not going to let some man in a sweater vest come in." "And what? Make you happy? That's what you're afraid of?" Silence. Long, heavy, honest silence. "Yes." Maya's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Grandma, surviving isn't the same as living. You taught me that. You literally taught me that." Dee didn't respond. But the next morning, she called Arthur. And she said yes. The date was set for Saturday, Olive Garden. 6:30. Karen came over to help her get ready. She brought earrings, small gold hoops that had been Dee's mother's. Maya did her makeup. Just a little, just enough. When Dee looked in the mirror, she touched her own face like she was meeting someone she hadn't seen in a long time, and then she drove to the restaurant. Alone. She insisted, which brings us back to the parking lot. Hands shaking, seatbelt stuck, the engine still running because she hadn't decided yet whether she was going in or going home. She sat there for 7 minutes. She watched people walk in and out of the restaurant, couples, families, teenagers on dates, and she thought about how easy it looked for all of them. How easy it looked to just walk towards someone. She thought about Frank, not with anger, not anymore. She'd let that go years ago. She thought about him with something more like recognition. He was the reason she'd built the wall, and the wall had kept her safe. But the wall had also kept her alone. And she was so tired of being alone. She turned off the engine. She unclasped the seatbelt. She opened the door. Arthur was already inside. She saw him before he saw her. He was sitting at a booth near the window, and he was wearing, God help her, a sweater vest. A burgundy one, and he was fidgeting with the menu, folding and unfolding the corner, and she realized with a shock that rolled through her whole body, he was nervous too. This 77-year-old man, this retired history teacher with kind eyes and a dead wife he still loved. He was sitting in an Olive Garden on a Saturday night, fidgeting like a teenager. Because he was nervous to meet her, and something in Dee's chest, something old, something she had locked away so tightly she'd lost the key, broke open. Not painfully. Not like it had broken when Frank left. This was different. This is like ice cracking on a river in March. This was the sound of something thawing. She walked toward the table. Arthur looked up, and he smiled. Not a big smile. Not a performance. Just this quiet, honest, relieved smile, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks and he could finally let it go. Dee? Arthur. She sat down. Her hands were still shaking. She put them in her lap and then thought, no, and put them on the table. Visible. Open. Arthur looked at her for a long moment. And then he said, I have to be honest with you. I almost didn't come tonight. I sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to talk myself out of it. Dee let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. 7. What? I sat in my car for 7 minutes. He laughed, she laughed, and the laughter broke whatever thin, fragile wall was still standing between them. They talked for 3 hours. The waiter came by 4 times. They ordered soup and salad and then forgot to eat half of it because the conversation kept pulling them forward. Arthur told her about his wife, June, who died of cancer in 2014. He told her about how he still set her coffee mug out every morning for a year after she passed, and how the morning he finally put it back in the cabinet was the hardest morning of his life. Dee told him about Frank, about the Tuesday, about the bathtub. She hadn't told anyone about the bathtub. Not Karen, not Maya, not her sister. But she told Arthur, and when she finished, he didn't try to fix it. He didn't say, I'm sorry, in that automatic way people do. He just nodded, slowly, and said, You must be the strongest person I've ever met. And Dee, who hadn't cried about Frank in 30 years, felt her eyes sting. I'm not strong, she whispered. I'm just stubborn. In my experience, Arthur said, those are the same thing. At the end of the night, Arthur walked her to her car. The parking lot was almost empty. The air was cold, February in Ohio cold, and their breath made small clouds between them. They stood there. Awkwardly. Beautifully. I had a wonderful time, Arthur said. So did I. Can I see you again? I'd like that. And then Arthur did something that Dee would later describe to Maya as the moment she knew. He reached out and he didn't take her hand. He didn't hug her. He didn't kiss her. He reached out and gently, so gently, adjusted the collar of her coat. It had folded under on one side. He fixed it, this tiny, careful, almost unconscious act of tenderness. The kind of thing you do for someone you already care about. The kind of thing Frank had never once done in 16 years of marriage. Dee looked up at him, and for the first time in 38 years, she didn't feel alone. Not because someone was standing in front of her, but because someone was standing in front of her, but because someone was seeing her. The real her. The 74-year-old woman with soil under her fingernails and Ella Fitzgerald on vinyl, and a lifetime of quiet survival. And he looked at all of it. Every single year of it, and he wasn't walking away. She drove home with the windows down. in February. The cold air on her face felt like waking up. When she got home, she called Maya. Maya picked up on the first ring. She'd been waiting. Well, Dee paused. He fixed my collar. What? My coat collar was folded wrong, and he fixed it. Maya didn't say anything for a moment, and then very softly, she started crying. Dee laughed. Oh, stop it, it's just a collar. But they both knew it wasn't. Dee and Arthur had their second date the following Saturday, and their third the Saturday after that. Within 2 months, Saturdays weren't enough, and Arthur was making the 45-minute drive to Dayton on Wednesday afternoons too, just to sit in Dee's garden and drink coffee and listen to her name the birds by their calls. He brought his vinyl collection over one Sunday. They combined them. Hers took up 3/4 of the shelf. He didn't mind. On a warm evening in May, Maya came over for Tuesday dinner and found something she hadn't seen in her entire life. 2 placemats on the table, both of them in use. Arthur was sitting in the chair by the window, helping Dee shell peas, and Ella Fitzgerald was playing from a small speaker on the counter, and the kitchen smelled like coffee and basil and something else, something Maya couldn't name at first, and then she could. It smelled like home. Not the house. The house had always been there. But home, the living, breathing 2-person warmth of it, that was new. That was what had been missing. That was the shape of the silence Dee had been walking around for 38 years. As of last fall, Dee and Arthur had been together for a little over a year. They're not married, they're not in a rush. Arthur still drives over from Springfield. And sometimes Dee drives to him. They're taking a trip to see David in Colorado this spring. Arthur's never been to the mountains, and Dee keeps telling him he's going to cry when he sees them. He says he probably will. He's not embarrassed about that anymore. Maya told me, when she first shared this true love story, that the thing she'll never forget is the night she came to pick up a dish she'd left at her grandmother's house. It was late. She didn't knock. She never does. She let herself in through the side door, and she found Dee and Arthur in the kitchen. Dancing. No music. Just swaying together in the dim light of the stove hood. Arthur's hand on the small of Dee's back, Dee's cheek against his shoulder, the coffee pot still on, the ceramic rooster watching from the windowsill. Maya backed out of the house without making a sound. She sat in her car in the driveway and smiled until her face hurt. Dee is 75 now. She will tell you, with that warm, closed-door smile finally wide open, that she wasted a lot of years being fine. That fine is the most dangerous word in the English language, because it sounds like an answer, but it's really a wall. And when people ask her what changed, what finally changed after all those years, she doesn't talk about the app. She doesn't talk about the profile, or the swiping, or the technology. She talks about the collar. She says, someone reached out and fixed something small. And it made me realize, I've been broken in a small way for a very long time. And I'd gotten so used to it I thought that was just what life felt like. She told Maya once, sitting in that garden. Birds calling from every direction. Arthur inside making coffee for the 3rd time that day. Love doesn't have an expiration date, sweetheart. It just sometimes gets put on a shelf so high you forget it's there. And then someone tall enough comes along and reaches up and hands it back to you. She was 74. She hadn't been touched, held, or chosen in 38 years. The world had told her, in 1,000 quiet ways, that her love story was over. It wasn't over. It was just waiting for her to walk into the restaurant. If this story moved you, if Dee and Arthur made you believe that finding love again later in life is not just possible, but maybe even more beautiful for the waiting, I want you to do something for me. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been fine for too long. Someone who might need permission to walk into the restaurant. And if you want another story like this one, there's one in the playlist on screen right now about a man who wrote a letter to a woman every year for 20 years before she ever read a single one. I promise you, it will stay with you. Subscribe if you haven't, because every week I find stories like these, stories about ordinary people and extraordinary emotional moments, and I bring them here for you. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment telling me, what would you have done in that parking lot? I read every single one. Some people wait a lifetime for love, and some people discover a a lifetime was just long enough to be ready for it.